Welcome to the second video in our Introduction to Careers in International Organisations. In this video I'm going to talk about understanding yourself and where you fit. So that's going to involve thinking about why you're interested in working in international organisations particularly, telling your story, addressing any gaps that you might find and places to look and next steps. You may already have heard of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Here they all are. They look very simple, don't they? Just 17 of them. But they're all quite complex, they're all quite interlinked, and they have a multiplier effect. There are 169 targets and 231 indicators of success. And all UN organisations are signed up to try and achieve these by 2030, although there's increasing conversation about whether or not that's actually going to be possible. A lot of other international organisations that are going about similar work have also aligned themselves to one of more of these goals in some way, so you'll see a lot of discussion about them in the sector more broadly. One thing you might think about when you're deciding where you want to put your time, energy and your work life is, are there any of these goals that particularly appeal to you? Which ones really motivate you? Which ones are you excited by? That's going to help you to start to narrow down where you might end up working, but it's also going to help you when you get to that stage in the recruitment process to start to be able to articulate what it is that's driving you to work in certain areas. I'd encourage you to think about this and look into it quite deeply. So if you know you're interested in work in international organisations, which one or more of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are you particularly interested in? And really interrogate that. What aspect are you most interested in? So let's take an example and imagine you're particularly interested in environmental change and the kind of work that goes on around sustainability. Well, all the UN agencies and many other international bodies are signed up to that goal, but let's start to be a bit more specific. Perhaps you might be interested in the fact that climate change disproportionately affects women. Maybe you've looked at gender imbalance as part of your studies at some point, or just in your own personal reading. UN Women is doing a lot of really interesting work on climate change. They have offices all over the world, so geographically, where would you be able to work? What are you most interested in doing for them? What role could you play? Have you developed great data skills? Are you an excellent speechwriter? Where could you see yourself fitting? That's very easy for me to say and a little bit more complex to do, but it is worth spending some time thinking through the answer to these questions for you. We've got some resources that can help you in this process. I'm not going to go into them in detail in this video because we've got other videos which do go into them in a lot more detail. But it's worth looking at them and really thinking about that for yourself. What's motivated you to make this commitment, if it is a commitment at this stage, to work in this area? Thinking about location, it might be useful to do a little bit more exploring, and I've got an example here of what that might look like, using UN Women again as an example. This is their X page, formerly known as Twitter, and you can see that they follow over 4,000 different accounts and have over 2 million people following them. I looked at their followers, and of course I can't possibly look down a whole list of 2.2 million followers, but I did zoom in on UN Women as a sort of alphabetical starting point, and I found here some examples of UN Women bodies working in different places. So UN Women Asia Pacific, UN Women Africa, and then as specific at a country level as UN Women Uganda. Alongside that, whilst perhaps your ultimate aim in this example might be to work for UN Women, we can also see there are some other organisations that are following this account that don't appear to have any official affiliation with UN or UN Women or any international body. You could use this as a way to start to explore who these organisations are, what kind of work they do, and if there might be some possibilities there to start to explore where you might build up some work experience, get a sense of what's happening in the broader field, maybe even targeting them for some voluntary or paid work. It can be useful to think about the different possibilities rather than just focusing on that single international organisation, which might be very popular, particularly if it's based in one of the larger cities, places like places like New York, Brussels or Geneva, where we know lots of international organisations are based. It will help you think more broadly about the different possibilities available to you, rather than just those big, well-known ones. I always say this in recruitment. It's your responsibility, not the recruiters, to tell them a story about you, your background and your experience in a way that makes sense and helps them understand the value that you could bring to their organisation. That's very easy for me to say and much more difficult to do. So how do you know it's the right story? Well, first of all, part of it comes from this point of reflection that we've been talking about, but then coupling that with research into what the organisation does, what their priorities are, what they're trying to achieve. And part of research, but also going beyond that, is networking. Not necessarily networking in order to be given a job, but networking in terms of asking people who work in this field what their understanding is of what's important at the moment. An obvious place to look will be the international organisation's own websites and blogs. Because of the responsibility for transparency and accountability, often annual reports are very openly and publicly available. They can be quite long and detailed, but even reading the summary will give you some good insight into what the big challenges have been, what the main priorities are this year or perhaps for the last few years. There are lots of online resources available, and I'm going to repeat my warning from the first video. Do be aware of the legitimacy of those resources. But I would recommend Better World Info, which is a site that lists lots and lots of different links and resources related to people working in different areas which are in some way trying to make the world better. The same caveats apply. Do check the legitimacy of everything they list there. But it can be a useful starting point to start to look into different places that you might work, different places where you might find information about whatever topic it is that you're interested in. Another word of warning, it's a really comprehensive, really busy website, and I would recommend you go into it giving yourself a bit of time to look through everything and with a fairly clear idea about what it is you're trying to get out of it. Otherwise it can just be a little bit overwhelming because there's so much there. You might also want to leverage the alumni network here at Cambridge. Again, not just specific to international organisations. I always recommend people approach networking really as a two-way street. Yes, you're hoping to get something from the alum or the person that you're talking to, but also think about what it is you can offer them in return for their time. We've got two really good videos on how you can find alumni on LinkedIn and how you can find alumni through our careers platform, Handshake, and I recommend you look at those to help you identify people. Of course, it's not just reaching out and talking to them. Simply by looking at someone's profile on somewhere like LinkedIn, you can see where they might have worked in the past, what they've studied, what other things they've done, and that can give you a really good insight into potential career paths into different positions. Once you've started to do some of that research, you've started to reflect on your own skills and strengths, you might start to become aware of some gaps that you want to fill that you're not perhaps quite meeting at the moment. In any other industry, you will hear me say you don't have to meet 100% of the job description. Don't worry if you don't quite meet the work experience requirements, it's still worth applying. But actually, that's not something that applies for intergovernmental bodies. There's two reasons for that. One is they are so popular, they get so many applicants per position that they can simply afford to be really, really fussy about their requirements and take someone who meets 100% of them because they have so many people applying. The other one is about their commitment to transparency and fairness. They don't want it to appear that somebody's got the job even though they don't have everything they need, perhaps just because they know somebody who already works for that organisation or for some sort of corrupt or nefarious reason. So they're really, really strict about making sure that you meet all of the job requirements, and that is particularly important here. So If you've discovered something that you think would be really important for the position you're interested in and you don't yet have it, think about how you might address that gap before you apply. That could be getting some work experience and building some skills in the private sector or for the government, for the public sector. It could be through approaching charities, maybe looking at some volunteering work. And if you are interested in a field position, it is important that you've had some international experience working or living or studying in a country that's perhaps quite different to your own. And that's particularly true if you're thinking of field work where you might be working in a country which is culturally very different than your own background. They do like to see people who have already experienced that, understand what it involves, and have some strategies to manage some of the challenges that can arise from that situation. While you're studying here at Cambridge, there are a number of organisations where you can learn a little bit more about what different roles involve and also start to build up some experience and strengths to help address those gaps as well. So I've listed some here: the Cambridge Development Initiative, the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, Pologia and the Wilberforce Society, which are our two student think tanks, and Cambridge University United Nations Association, or CUNA, does some really interesting work as well, and it's worth signing up for their events and following them on Instagram. The Cambridge Hub offers local volunteering positions, and that might be interesting if that's something that's available to you. A note here on speculative applications. Again, I'll repeat what I just said about the real sense of transparency for many intergovernmental organisations. That means they will only recruit through an advertised vacancy. So this might be more useful if you're targeting small or medium-sized organisations, perhaps hoping to build up some relevant work experience for that eventual application to a larger one. But a speculative approach simply means that rather than responding to an advertised vacancy, you approach an organisation, you tell them why you're interested in the work that they do, what skills you have to offer, and ask if there's the possibility of a position being created or if you could support them with a project. Sometimes you could offer to do that on a voluntary basis if that's possible for you, but you can also do this asking for paid work, and it can be very successful in some cases. We have a whole video on this, on speculative applications in development and charitable organisations, that might be worth a look, and some of that is also very applicable to some other organisations, even if they're not themselves necessarily development or charity focused. So, next steps that you might take. I would encourage you to explore the different routes into the international organisation of your choice in more depth. Necessarily, I've only been able to give you a really kind of short insight into as many different ones as I can here, but there's so much more to learn. If you want to hear from other Cambridge students and alumni about their own pathways, I recommend you have a look at our blog and elsewhere on our YouTube channel. There's lots of good stories there. Remember what I said about reflecting on your own experiences to help you tell your story, and I've linked all those reflective resources in our description below. And finally, once you're ready to apply, you might want to sign up for relevant vacancy sites. They often have their own alerts that you can subscribe to, and you might also find it interesting to look at our careers newsletters. Whatever you choose, I wish you lots of luck as you start to explore the different possibilities with international organisations.